Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd, and I just watched the first two episodes of season 5 of Star Trek Discovery, and it was pretty much typical STD kind of stuff, a lot of action scenes, a lot of special effects, but most of it is kind of style over substance, and with a lot of repetitive things, the kind of things we saw a lot of times before on the show, like someone flying in a spacesuit through some space debris, which we've seen a bunch of times, and all kinds of ideas they borrow from other movies and other places, and not a lot of originality. There was some good attention to detail, there were a few little scenes which I did kind of like, which I'm going to get to, but most of it was pretty bad, and what annoys me personally most of all is that things just don't make any sense if you actually think about it. And at least they got some references correctly this time. Like someone actually bothered to look up the older Star Trek shows and try to tie back to that. And so there were a few moments which I liked, but a lot of it was a jumbled mess, which I'm going to have to now analyze and nitpick. So let's get right into it. So the episode starts immediately with the action scene of Michael standing on a ship flying at warp and enjoying it apparently. When a captain has to perform their duties, shouldn't they be focused on that and not having fun when you're supposedly trying to save the whole galaxy or whatever? Then it cuts back to 2 days earlier or something. So what was the point of that? Like later when we get to that point, it's exactly the same. There is no other perspective, there is no twist or surprise. And I know a lot of movies and TV shows do that kind of thing, but usually it's for a purpose. Usually it's to provide some kind of twist later on that it's not what you thought was going on, it's actually something else. So it's surprising you in some way, or it shows you a different perspective of things, or it's just to leave some kind of mystery hanging. But here it's just kind of a promise, oh, there will be an awesome action scene soon, so don't leave, keep watching, because we're going to show you a tease of this in the beginning of the episode. It's like showing a trailer of a later scene inside the episode itself. And then there's some kind of a party of Starfleet and Federation dignitaries, and they're talking about how awesome it is that the Federation is back, and they're drinking cocktails which are supposed to look like the symbol of the Federation. And Adira asks, what are those little white things floating in there? And it immediately cuts to Stamens giving kind of a creepy look, so that kind of made me laugh unintentionally. And then they tell her it's supposed to be like the stars in the symbol of the Federation, and they taste like Jamba sticks. So that's a reference to those sticks that Jake and Nog were always eating on Deep Space Nine. And there are a lot of little references like that, like at some scene they talk about self-sealing stem balls, and a lot of little details, which I don't mind. I do appreciate them because it makes me understand at least someone bothered to look things up this time. But sometimes it just makes the galaxy seem smaller. So of course that the whole galaxy, that's the only kind of candy you can reference. So Jamba sticks from Deep Space Nine, that's the only thing the whole galaxy knows about. So in some ways it's kind of silly if they do it too much. Then they talk about Stamens being sad because the Spore program was cancelled, meaning Starfleet will not be pursuing developing Spore engines for the other ships, which makes no sense since they had a working prototype of it in the previous season. They actually used it on Book's ship, which also was Spore jumping around, and it's basically infinite speed, so what can be better than that? So why not pursue it? They didn't actually explain it. And Stamens said something about maybe I could have solved the navigator problem, and so it's too bad they cancelled it. But that problem was already solved. Remember that prototype they had in the previous season did not require any navigator. So obviously they did solve that problem. They could do it artificially with the computer without a navigator. Do the writers not remember their own writing from just one season ago? They already duplicated this technology and was using it. They had a working prototype which they used on Book's ship, which was a Spore jumping around, which did not require any navigator. So this is what I mean that things don't make any sense if you actually think about it. Also in this party we see a Morn type of alien which we saw a bunch of times before, and also some new alien mask, which I'm betting we're going to see a lot of this kind of new alien, because every time they show us a new alien mask, suddenly those types of aliens are everywhere in the galaxy. So I'm betting we'll see that kind of alien everywhere in the season, because that's a new mask, so they have to now show it off everywhere. Then Michael gets called away from the party by that admiral from the Mummy, and he gives her a little device which looks like an infinity symbol with a little ball flying in circles inside of it, and once she takes it, she appears in a white empty room, and that guy with the glasses appears there, and he calls it the Infinity Room. So I guess it's kind of the cone of silence type of place in which they can talk privately without any ability of anyone to eavesdrop on them for top secret briefings or something. And this infinity symbol also appears in the new opening of the show, so I suspect we're going to see a lot of it, unfortunately. And again, it's not really necessary. Like, what's better about this than how they were previously communicating in secret? How is this more secure? So it's a little bit silly. And then the guy with the glasses, who, by the way, we still don't know what is his position exactly. Is he part of Starfleet? Is he a politician? Like, he seems to outrank the Admiral. He seems to be bossing everyone around and knowing things that no one else knows. And yet, what is his position exactly? What is his authority to be bossing everyone around? They never explained it in the show. We still don't know what he is in terms of rank and so on. He's just there. He just appears and gives orders to everyone, and everyone just obeys him and not knowing why. He never explains anything, even though later on he does explain it. So if he can explain it later, why couldn't he explain it from the beginning? Like, he's being mysterious just for the sake of being mysterious, when later on he reveals everything. So why couldn't he do it in this scene? And he says it's a top secret mission, it's a red directive. And that kind of made me laugh, because you know how in New Trek they always love things being red. You know, red matter, red signals, a red door, a red angel. It's always a red something in every season. So that also kind of made me laugh, how they keep saying it's a red directive. It's not a normal directive, it's a red one. So that must be important. So that kind of made me laugh, because it's always a red something in New Trek. So anyway, Michael asks Kovic, what exactly is the mission? Like, what are we supposed to find there? And he just says you have to recover some super important item from that ship before it falls into enemy hands, and refuses to say anything else about it. Even though later in the episode he does. So that was also silly. I mean, even the Admiral doesn't know what the mission actually is. He seems to be above the Admiral. Even the President doesn't seem to know anything. And so, who is he? Why is he giving orders to everyone? And why do everyone obey him? And also it's funny how he tells Michael that she has to secure that Romulan ship by all means necessary, including lethal force, which obviously later on she completely disregards and refuses to fire at the villains even with a stun setting, and lets them escape for some reason. So that was a clear violation of what he just said to her in that scene, and no one seemed to notice that. And yet some other guy later on, some other captain, who does try to complete the mission by any means, he does get punished for it, and Michael never does. And so that also was kind of funny. So anyway, when we see that Romulan ship, we see the two villains of the season on it, and they're wearing the spacesuits, which then open up in a kind of Stargate fashion, you know, pulling back in a kind of nanotechnology kind of way. Which kind of reminds me of season 1 of Discovery, when we had those Klingon suits which could also do that, but you know, that was back in the 23rd century before all the other shows, and so that was annoying to me. And here we have these two scavengers, and also it doesn't really make sense. How come this Romulan ship was only now found 800 years later? I mean, it was right there in an easily accessible place, so how come no one else ever searched it until now? And who exactly found it? Like, suddenly it's a race against time, everyone are trying to get to that ship, and yet who was the first one to find it? They never actually explain any of these details, and that is annoying to me, because it makes no sense. If Starfleet found it first, why didn't they immediately board it? Why did they wait for Discovery to get there? And if someone else found it first, then technically Starfleet has no right over it, because it's not their own property even. So none of this makes any sense if you actually think about it. So anyway, these two guys reveal their faces, and it's apparently a scroll from Marvel and Shin Hoti from Ahsoka. And they notice that Starfleet ships are approaching, and one of the ships suddenly appeared there, so obviously that's Discovery, and they're surprised by it. And the scroll guy wants to get away from there before Starfleet catches them, because they only have a few minutes, but she says, no, we have to get it all. And if they only have a few minutes, why are they standing around arguing and talking, and he tells her about their plans for their honeymoon or something? If you only have a few minutes, why are you spending that precious time talking instead of pursuing your mission? So anyway, Kovic tells Michael to use lethal means if necessary to secure the ship, which she won't, and then she takes Mr. Rice and Mrs. T with her to that ship with no additional security, so why not? Don't they have like thousands of people on the ship? Remember the size of the turbolift shaft, which makes it look like a Death Star, so shouldn't they have like thousands of people? So why not take a few more soldiers instead of just two, if it's such an important mission? So that is also ridiculous. So they're going around this Romulan ship and they see a dead Romulan body, which at least the uniform does actually look like from the TNG era, so that was a nice detail. But if there is still air on the ship and they said it has breathable atmosphere, so how come that body did not completely rot and disintegrate by now after 800 years? If it was in a vacuum or it was frozen, then that could make sense. But they say it's totally breathable atmosphere, and it's not as if they just activated it, and so how come that body is still intact? And then they get to the ship's vault and they say that someone already broke in and the vault is empty. And then they say that even with their current level of technology, it takes much longer to break through Romulan encryption. So that must mean the invaders are still on the ship. And I'm like, why? Why does that mean they're still on the ship? Because it takes a long time to break in? That means they must still be on the ship, even though the vault is empty. Why? It makes no sense. If they discover that they just got in there, and so they couldn't have time to break in, but they did break in. The vault is empty. So what do you mean they must still be here? Why? And then the two villains show up and start shooting at them, but apparently they're not such bad villains because they're not trying to kill them, because they fire some kind of beam at Mr. Rice and Mrs. T, and it just locks them into some kind of energy bubble, and they're stuck there and cannot move. So it's a non-lethal weapon they fired at them. So maybe later on they will not be the main villains of this season. Otherwise it's not really any sense of danger, because the villains are not even trying to kill you. They're nice villains. And also the bubble thing, we've seen that before back in season 2 of Discovery, when Empress Georgiou was using that kind of weapon that fires bubbles at people and locks them into bubbles and they cannot move. It's very repetitive. Like, we keep seeing the same kind of stuff again and again in the show. And only Michael is able to dodge that fire, and she's chasing them through the corridor, and they're on the other side of the corridor, which we don't see the end of, and she says, "You have nowhere else to go." How does she know that? Did she study the schematics of the Romulan ship, which she's never been on? She shouldn't even know about the Romulans, anything. So she tells them there's nowhere to go from the other side of that corridor. How does she know that? And then she says, "Let's talk." And then they come toward her with some kind of a grenade which is ticking in their hands. And then Michael notices she has that device that she stole from the vault of the Romulan ship, and she says, "Hand it over, or things will end badly for you," or something. And then they just throw that grenade at Michael, and then they beam out. And then she just stands there looking at the ticking grenade, which then doesn't explode. It just creates a portal to outside the ship. And then Michael gets sucked out into space, but she's used to it. It happened to her so many times in the show that it doesn't bother her anymore. It's no big deal to be in a vacuum for a few seconds. She's immediately, automatically gets dressed in a spacesuit, and then once again we have a scene of her flying through some space debris. How many times have we seen that by now? Like, it keeps happening every season. And she's somehow able to see their cloaked ship and lands on it with magnetic boots and does a superhero landing and poses for the camera. And then it's the same scene we saw in the beginning of the episode, in which they jump to warp and she's still on their ship. And then she's shooting her hand phaser at their engines to disable their ship, which was also a little bit ridiculous. I mean, these ships are usually taking fire from other ships which have much bigger guns, much more powerful weapons. And yet a hand phaser is supposed to be able to disable them. I guess maybe because she's inside their shields, and so that's why it's possible. I'm not sure. And then some other Starfleet ships arrives to help, and it locks a tractor beam onto this ship. And it's one of the ships they were saying was approaching earlier, so it's not totally out of the blue. But then Michael starts arguing with the captain of that ship about how to proceed. Like, she wants them to disengage, and she wants to do everything by herself, and the captain of the ship is saying that he was chasing those two scavengers for a long time. He wants to complete the mission, and so they keep bickering and arguing with each other. And she even stops firing her hand phaser while she's doing it, and so why are you wasting precious time not completing the mission, and instead you're just arguing with each other? So that was also ridiculous. And that captain's name is Captain Raynor, which isn't that the name of a character from StarCraft? I seem to remember there was a Jim Raynor who was also kind of rebellious and would disobey orders and stuff like that, so maybe they got some inspirations from that, or maybe it's a complete coincidence. So anyway, they keep arguing over subspace about how to proceed, and the dialogue makes no sense. Like, who are we supposed to be rooting for? Who is right or wrong? Like, the technobubble makes no sense. And then that other ship just escapes, and none of them manage to do anything. And then when that other ship escapes, it first splits into all kinds of pieces, and all the pieces fly into different directions at warp speed, and so that's why they're not able to find them. But are they forgetting they have a spore drive? So shouldn't it be easy for them to simply jump to all the possible locations that all those signatures are going to, and then scan them close by, and then figure out where the real ship is? And so with a spore drive, it shouldn't be that much of a problem, and yet no one even suggests it. And also the dialogue itself, like when Michael was arguing with Raynor, she wasn't using actual arguments, like saying, oh, we have to do this that way, or else this will happen. No, she was just saying, oh, come on, let me do it how I want to do it. Like she was literally saying, come on, as an argument, without explaining why she wants it that way. Like that's what I mean, annoying, illogical dialogue. And a quick note about all the minor characters on the bridge. As always in this show, they barely get anything to do. Like each of them has maybe one line in the whole episode. Especially I think Lisa One Eye has one single line, which is hang on. And speaking of her eye, how come in the 31st century she still cannot fix it? She cannot get her eye to look normal? Even after the 900-year jump into the future, she still cannot fix it. So anyway, even though they have a spore drive and they can literally jump everywhere they want in a second, they cannot determine which of those warp trails is the real ship. And then Michael has the brilliant idea. She says, I know the only person in the whole galaxy who can help, and that just happens to be my boyfriend Book, who should be in jail because in the previous season he betrayed the Federation, he tried to commit genocide, he detonated a weapon of mass destruction, but he got a slap on the wrist and just got sent to help some refugees somewhere, and that's the whole punishment. He doesn't get any jail time, and we now need him for some reason, even though we have the resources of the whole Federation and Starfleet, but he's the only one in the whole galaxy who can help us. And him being my old boyfriend is completely irrelevant. That's not the reason I'm calling him here. So anyway, he arrives on the ship, and then as always with Book and Michael, they always share some stories about some past adventures which we never saw. So once again he says, oh, they did that trick like we once did on some planet or something. So they always have that kind of dialogue. So I once made a compilation of that. I'm guessing I will have to do a longer one after this season. And as they're walking in the corridor, we see there's apparently a cherubble on the wall, crawling all over the place. So is that Lorca's old cherubble, the one from season 1 that disappeared after Lorca disappeared? And I always wondered what happened to it. So is that the same cherubble? It's been roaming around the ship, climbing on the walls all this time, and only now we see it. Book looks at all the warp trails of all the possible directions, and he looks at the destinations of all of them, and that's how he's able to determine where the real ship was going. And that is incredibly stupid, because that means that those guys who escaped didn't bother to change course. Like, they know they're being tracked, so why not go to some random direction and only later on, after being beyond sensor range, then change direction? Or better yet, even replace your ship, take some other ship to your real destination. And yet they were dumb enough to head directly to their final destination, and that's how Book knows that's them, because they're heading to some place which has a dealer by the name of Fred, who loves the old stuff. He loves collecting antique things, I guess, and so that's how they know where to go. And so Kovich orders them to go there, and Captain Raynor says he'll go there with his ship as well. He'll use normal warp travel, which I guess is pretty fast in this time period, since they're able to get there almost at the same time. So what's even the point of the Spore drive? Maybe that's why Starfleet cancelled it. Like, there's no point. Their agents are so quick now, they can get anywhere in the galaxy almost immediately anyway. So I guess maybe it makes sense. And then Raynor asks the Admiral who will be in charge of this mission, him or Michael. And then the Admiral thinks and says, maybe you should try working together. And then he leaves it at that and leaves. And so no one is in charge. And so this is really dumb, because later on it will once again lead to an argument. Each of them will want to do things differently, and they'll not be able to settle it. So this is terrible decision making by the Admiral. I mean, why not put someone single in charge, and that way it will be more effective. That's how militaries usually work, you know. Because if anyone can just do whatever they want, then it will be a chaos, it will be a mess. And that's exactly what happens later on. So I blame the Admiral. Why didn't he put one of them in charge to make sure there will be some order? And so instead they'll be arguing and they'll be fighting each other, and each of them will want to do things differently. So this is really silly. So anyway, Discovery Spore jumps and it arrives to the planet Tatooine, apparently, since it's a desert planet and everyone are using hover bikes to fly over the desert. I can almost hear the music in the back of my head. Tu 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 tu. So as always, a lot of similarities to other franchises. And it's also kind of silly because if they have these advanced transporters now, they can just tap their com badge and appear anywhere they want. Why do they even need to ride bikes anywhere? Can't they simply immediately teleport to whatever spot they want to go to? How come they have to constantly drive on bikes all over the place when they have transporters? And also the planet has those spiky mountains everywhere, and that's also an original. We've seen that kind of stuff so many times, and so couldn't they invent something new? And the city looks kind of like a Muslim city, you know, with all those round rooftops and everyone dressed in robes. And then we see Book and Michael had just beamed in there, and then literally 10 seconds later, Captain Rainer also beams in. And it's ridiculous because the Discovery Spore jumped there. It got there in 10 seconds. Are you telling me this other captain using normal warp engines got there just 1 minute later? So that's the whole difference between a Spore drive and a normal warp drive. So no wonder Starfleet decided not to pursue it, because if the normal warp engines are this quick, then that can explain why there is no need for the Spore drive, because it's not a big difference apparently, since apparently he got there just 1 minute after them. Even less, like 10 seconds later. So this was absolutely ridiculous. Then we see Skrull and Shin Hoti already arrived to Fred's location, and that's the only scene that I kind of liked, because the moment I saw Fred, he immediately looked kind of oddly familiar to me, and at first, the first few seconds, I couldn't realize why. And gradually I started realizing he looks kind of like Data, like he has the exact same kind of makeup, the exact kind of hair. And he's speaking kind of robotically like Brent Spiner used to do as Data, so he's doing a pretty good imitation. And so that's when I started to get intrigued. I started thinking maybe this is going to be the real villain of the season. Maybe these two guys were kind of bad guys, but they will actually be on Discovery's side in the end. And maybe this Fred guy is the real villain. Maybe we'll finally get to see kind of a lore type of android villain. Maybe he wants to destroy all life in the galaxy, and that's why he needs that device or whatever. So I started getting intrigued, and I was enjoying the attention to detail of him kind of behaving like Data. And so I was thinking we were going to get a new kind of villain who will be an android, and so I was actually getting interested. So that's probably my favorite scene in this whole episode, because I really was enjoying to see a Data style of android again. But then after just 1 minute, they just killed him off. He wasn't willing to pay them as much as they wanted, and then they just killed him, and he's dead now. And that's the end of that character. And I thought later on maybe they will revive him, because, you know, androids are not so easy to kill. How many times did Data suffered huge damage and they were always able to repair him? And so I was thinking later on maybe they will fix this android. And yet, apparently not. So that was sort of like a cameo of a Sung type of android, and that's it. And also, they say later on that he was built by Alton Sung, the one we saw in Picard. But the androids we saw in Picard were kind of more organic, they were more human looking, so how come he looks exactly like Data? I guess maybe he built him before him and Maddox created that colony of androids on that planet. And maybe Fred left that planet for some reason, and so I guess I can explain that away, but it's kind of strange. Like, this is the first time we see kind of a new brother of Data, who I guess Sung didn't make in his own image because he doesn't look like Brent Spiner. So, you know, I was intrigued by this. The same way I was intrigued in the beginning of Picard show, when they showed those other androids, those bold ones who were basically like slaves on Mars. And I remember being very intrigued by that, thinking we'll get some new android characters and we'll get to see some more androids. That can be interesting. And then they just all died and we didn't see them again. So the same here. They introduce a character that I think can be very interesting, and yet they kill him off immediately. So that was a huge disappointment, I think. So Michael, Book, and Rainer then chase these two guys on the hover bikes, and it's funny how they keep talking with each other while on the bikes, even though they're going at huge speeds and there's wind on them. And so even if they're talking through the comm badges, there should still be a lot of noise. And so how come they can hear each other perfectly without any problem, even while going at such speeds? And there's one shot when they're all on a split screen together, so that was kind of funny. And it all feels like, some kind of action movie for the masses. And again, no real story, no real substance to any of it, just a cool action scene in the desert. And meanwhile, Tilly tries to find more because Michael previously asked her to hack into the database or something to figure out what they actually are chasing. And then the admiral comes in and catches her in the act of trying to get more information, but then he's curious himself because even the admiral, the head of Starfleet, doesn't know what the mission is, which is hilarious. So Kovic outranks the Starfleet admiral. And then they find out that that Romulan scientist was actually one of the Romulans in the background of that scene in TNG in the episode The Chase, when they found out that all humanoid aliens in the galaxy all originated from those progenitors who planted their secret message in the DNA of the different species in the galaxy. And so one of those Romulans in the background was actually a scientist apparently, and he was so impressed by that he studied those progenitors and he found some piece of their old technology which he wants to keep hidden. And yet he left clues to it all over the place, all over the galaxy for some reason. And so at least it raised some kind of interesting thing from the past of Star Trek, because that episode about the progenitors was a cool kind of excuse to explain why all the humanoid aliens look so human, because it wasn't just random evolution apparently that someone seeded humanoid life all over the galaxy, but ever since it was never actually mentioned in the rest of Star Trek, so it was kind of nice to get a callback to that, and maybe they'll somehow expand on that, and hopefully they will not ruin it. And it was never explained how exactly that ancient species of humanoids, how did they go extinct exactly, so maybe it will be explained this season. Maybe some even bigger villain will be revealed, so I am kind of curious to see where they're planning to go with it, but I'm also really scared they're going to mess it up and make it all stupid, so I guess we'll wait and see. And as always, this whole season seems to be like one long chase scene after some MacGuffin, some plot device that drives the story, but there is no actual story other than that. It's like a video game. You just have to keep finding clues and keep finding more and more things to complete the puzzle, and then maybe in the end there will not be anything interesting at all. So I guess we'll wait and see. So during this chase through the desert, Captain Raynor is trying to do what Kovic ordered them to do, which is use any means to complete the mission. So he shoots something at the mountains to disrupt the escape of the bad guys, and then that causes an avalanche somehow, even though it's not snow, so how come there's an avalanche in the desert from a mountain? I'm not sure how any of this works, but anyway, Michael tells him not to do it, and then he decides to do it. And it doesn't cause any problem to the settlement next door, which is what Michael was worried about, but it gave the bad guys an idea, and then they also did that, and they do cause a huge avalanche. And then there's like a huge shockwave, which is about to destroy that city next door, and then they have to save all those people, and so that allows the bad guys to run away. And later on in the next episode, that captain will get reprimanded, not for anything he did, but for giving the bad guys an idea. That's what he'll be punished for. Even though he was doing what he was ordered to do by the Red Directive, to do whatever is possible to stop the bad guys from escaping with that item that is a danger to the whole galaxy. And so technically he did exactly what he should have done based on those orders, and yet he will get punished in the next episode, he will get demoted, he will get kicked out of Starfleet. But earlier on, when Michael refused to use deadly force against the bad guys, she didn't even try to stun them and allow them to escape. But she never gets punished for that. And then the stupidest part of the whole episode probably is when they decide to use the starships to protect the city. And they do it by literally crashing both the ships, both the Discovery and Raynor's ship. They crash the ships between the shockwave and the city. And after they crash it and it gets stuck in the desert, then they raise the shields to protect that city from the shockwave. So none of this makes any sense. This is the 32nd century, so I can accept the fact that starships are much tougher than they used to be before. But when you do that kind of thing, you lose all believability, you lose all sense of realism and a sense of danger. Like now in any situation, you never should be worried about the ships, because ships can literally crash into planets without any scratch to them later. and they can basically do anything. And so with that level of technology, it becomes too easy, and so there is no sense of realism or danger anymore. And also that whole chasing with the bikes makes no sense. If they have those portable transporters, they can beam anywhere they want, so why even bother with the bikes? Just beam in front of the other guys. And so why don't they do that? And so nothing makes any sense. That's what's so annoying about all of this. So anyway, the bad guys get away, but meanwhile on the Discovery they manage to get into the memories of that android who got killed, and they're able to see what he saw before he died. And when he was looking over that book that the bad guys gave him, he was going through the pages really quickly, but now they slow it down in the computer and they look at the images, and Michael says to zoom in on a specific page where she notices there's a drawing of a planet which has two moons. And because that planet has two moons, she immediately knows which planet it is. Just think about it for a second. You're in a galaxy with 100 billion stars, but because she sees that this planet in a drawing by hand, it has two moons, she immediately knows which planet it is in the galaxy. Just think about that for a second to realize how ridiculous that is. And also it reminds me of season 1 of Picard, which also had something similar, because remember Soji was having nightmares about her childhood and she saw two moons in the sky, and that's how they were later able to find that planet of the androids, because she remembered seeing two moons in the sky, and so that's how they knew that she must come from a planet which has two moons, and then were immediately able to find that specific planet just because it has two moons. It's as if the writers think that's something special. Maybe because our planet has only one moon, and so they think that must be the case everywhere. And they think that having two moons is something so special, it must be very rare in the galaxy, that people will immediately know which planet it is from the whole galaxy if they know it has two moons. This is so ridiculous on a literal astronomical level. And once again, the writers have no clue about basic things in science and astronomy, and they're allowed to write Star Trek. So this is absolutely ridiculous and just cannot be explained. Normally I can sometimes come up with convoluted excuses for the writers to try to make things work, but in this case it's impossible. Later on she does say something to the Admiral about how a lot of planets have two moons, but because these moons go in a parallel course to each other or something, that's why they're so unique. But how can she determine that from a drawing? This is a handmade drawing. And later when she speaks with Kovic again, she tells him it will take you hundreds of years to figure out which exact planet it is, or you can tell me everything and then I will tell you which planet it is. So, wait a second. So, Michael's brain is better than all the computers in Starfleet. Like, she immediately knew which planet it is in the whole galaxy, but it will take Starfleet 100 years to figure it out. And she literally makes a deal with him. Either you declassify everything to me, or I will not help you. I will not tell you which exact planet it is. And then he agrees to tell her. And in the end of the day, there's nothing really so classified about it. Everyone knew about the progenitors already previously in the previous shows. And yet he never actually says what piece of technology they're looking for, except it belonging to the progenitors. But what exactly does it do? He never actually says. I guess he doesn't know. And so if he doesn't know, so there is nothing classified. There is no new information except it being tied to the progenitors. And so what was the big deal about hiding it? Why couldn't he tell that from the beginning of the episode? So after Kovic explains to her, it all ties back to the progenitors, that Romulan who was there in the TNG episode The Chase, one of the Romulans in the background was a scientist who later found some of the technology of the progenitors, I guess the technology they used to create life, that seeded life. As Kovic says, even though technically they didn't create life, they simply seeded their own DNA in existing planets which already had early life. That's what was said in the dialogue, and yet he keeps saying they created life, so that's kind of inaccurate. So that's the technology they're chasing after. Even though, didn't the Genesis technology in the early Star Trek movies, wasn't that already more powerful than that? And so why are they so worried about this ancient technology when they already had technology which is more powerful than that anyway? So that's kind of ridiculous how they keep saying this is such an important mission, that it's a red directive, when in fact it's not really so important, I think. And even if someone else finds it, why do you think it will be used to some horrible agenda. I guess if that android was evil, the one that got killed off, and he wanted maybe to destroy all life or something, then it will make sense why it's so important to get that technology. Maybe it can erase life as well. So if some other humanoid gets it, why do you think he's going to use it to some horrible agenda? To do what exactly? To destroy life when he's himself alive? And so nothing makes sense. And then Michael reveals which planet it is. She says it's actually a planet which has 3 moons, but 2 of its moons move in perfect synchronization, which technically is impossible because if both moons are moving parallel to each other and yet they're orbiting the same planet, so they have to be in different distances from it, and so if they're in different distances, then they have to be moving at different speeds to maintain a stable orbit, and so how can they be in perfect synchronization with each other all the time? It makes no sense scientifically, so that's also kind of ridiculous. And also, how come Michael just happens to know of that planet? So she's been there, I guess, and so it's just such a lucky coincidence, once again, that if not for Michael, the Federation would never have found that planet based on that drawing. But Michael instinctively knew exactly where it is immediately somehow. So this is just such a lucky astronomical coincidence. And then Kovic gives her that infinity device again, I guess to be able to contact him whenever she needs to, and sends her on the mission to that planet. And that's the end of the first episode. So bringing up the cogenitor idea back again does have some potential, and so part of me is curious, but I'm also terrified they're going to mess it all up with stupid writing by adding stupid things to it. It's dangerous that they might destroy this whole idea completely by making it all stupid, so that's my biggest worry. And the only scene I actually enjoyed and liked in this whole episode was the one with the Data kind of android, but they killed him off immediately, so what a waste of potential. It could have been an interesting character, at least for an episode or two, but it was just one scene, it was just kind of a cameo, I guess. You know, maybe they were intending to have Brent Spiner in that role of another Sung type of android, but I guess he's too old and they don't want to spend time making him look younger. Maybe fans can deepfake Brent Spiner into that scene, it can make it more interesting, I guess. But at least it had some attention to detail with the mannerisms and the way that he behaved in kind of similar way. That could have been an interesting villain. I guess they might revive that character later since he's in their sick bay, so maybe they'll do something more with him. I guess we'll wait and see. So that's the end of the review of the first episode. I will do my review of the second episode shortly, since I've already seen it. And let me know what you think, and we can discuss it all in the comments below. And I will see you all next time. Bye bye.